What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Quant Edge Show here on RotoGrinders. As always, happy to be with you. We have week number 3 in the NFL. So I am Justin Van Zuiden. I will be hosting the show for the next hour or so. And we hope you enjoyed. If this is your first time checking out this show, we'll give you a little bit of a rundown here because we are actually making this show free this week. So hope to get more eyes on it and you see the value in possibly getting yourself a premium subscription going forward. So we'll give you the lay of the land here in just a second. But first, let me introduce my two co-hosts. We've got Eliot Crist on one side from the Quant Edge. Eliot, how are you?
I'm doing well. I didn't play enough Patriots defense last week, but we did talk up DeMarcus Robinson, so I'll count that up as a victory. And, a couple weeks in a row, we've kind of nailed everybody. So, it's been a lot of fun to do this show, and I'm excited to be back for week 3.
Yeah, and we can talk about that too later in the show, how to handle chalky defenses. And we've got some bad teams in the NFL this year, and that's going to make, I think, the rest of this year a lot more interesting from a DFS perspective as far as how to break down what we do with some of these games with huge spreads like we've never seen in the DFS era over the last 6 or 7 years. So we'll talk about that, make some time to mention that throughout the show tonight. We've also got Matt Gajewski here with us, still sporting his White Sox cap even in a tough year. So good job not being a fair weather fan there. And, you can be on my side this week and root for the Cardinals to beat the Cubs in a big series.
What's up, guys? Yeah, I don't know about that. I actually live in Milwaukee, so that's kind of a touchy subject right now.
That's a fun race.
Yeah, it is a really fun race. I'm really happy that John Brown and Josh Allen keep hitting, though, and I'm excited for another week. Did not have enough Patriots defense, as it sounds like you guys didn't either, but we'll move on.
Yeah, for sure. And last week, it was a relatively low-scoring week from a DFS perspective. We had the Patriots defense obviously going off, but not a ton of offense last week. We saw some chalkier teams like the Saints really struggle. Injuries, of course, hitting Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, and lots of stuff for us to talk about going forward. And, that's where we usually start this show. So what we do on this show is we break down 5 different topics throughout the show. There's obviously plenty of content all across the DFS landscape, plenty of stuff here on RotoGrinders that breaks things down game by game for you. We do this show format just a little bit differently. So we're going to go through 5 different topics on the show tonight, and we're going to start it off with injury talk, which becomes more and more relevant as the season goes along. So let's begin there, and let's talk about those quarterback injuries last week. Drew Brees going to be out about 6 weeks for the Saints. Ben Roethlisberger going to be out the rest of the year for the Steelers. So what does that do, I guess, in DFS? We're only concerned about this week for now. What does that do for the near-term outlook for the Saints and the Steelers offensively? How are we going to handle that in the next few weeks? Matt, I'll start with you on your thoughts on those quarterback injuries.
I don't think it matters as much for the Steelers. We saw Mason Rudolph come in. He attempted 19 passes, and he did a pretty good job, completed 63% of them. Pittsburgh was already passing at a really high rate, 74%. And Big Ben did lead the league in pass attempts last year. So it'll be interesting to see if Rudolph continues that trend. He went to a pass-happy Oklahoma State where he did play with his teammate James Washington. So that's something I'm watching. I think they'll be a little bit less affected than the Saints. Teddy Bridgewater did not look quite as good, only completed about 50% of his passes. So that's kind of how I think those two teams break down for now.
Yeah, that's okay, though. The Saints are going to start Taysom Hill at quarterback, fullback, wide receiver, and tight end this week. So he'll be plenty of opportunity to put up fantasy points. He'll troll everybody. Eliot, what do you think about these quarterback situations here? Are these teams going to be largely hands off for you, or how are we handling the Saints and Steelers?
So, I think each week will be its own individual week. I think one thing that's really interesting is that Sean Payton has already come out and said that he's not even ready to proclaim Teddy Bridgewater as the starter. If Taysom Hill is the starter, I think he's interesting in DFS for his rushing upside. But, I think it limits Kamara somewhat. We saw him not really have a ton of success last week. I think the Saints will slow it down, try to win with defense. But Michael Thomas, if Bridgewater is the quarterback and they get down, will still get a lot of targets. We saw that last week. With Mason Rudolph, the coach came out this week and when he was asked about Dante Moncrief, the wide receiver coach, he said, wide receivers need to catch the ball. And, that's that sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but when you watch Moncrief, I mean, he uses his head more than he uses his hands to try to catch the football. And if James Washington takes over that role with the way Mason Rudolph liked to take shots 20 or more yards downfield, that college chemistry, and we saw his air yards in week one and the way he's able to stack defenders, I think James Washington becomes an interesting play, but Mason Rudolph will rely on his players to make plays. And so that's good for Juju. And as long as they continue to pass at the rate they want to pass at, and, quite frankly, they might pass even more now that they're probably going to be down in games more, I think that the playmakers for the Steelers will be okay. It'll be interesting to see if James Conner's okay or not. That there may be some adjustments there. Samuel's probably a better pass catcher than he is runner. So I still think the Steelers are okay, but the Saints may get more conservative overall.
And that's not it for the quarterback injuries. We've got Cam Newton still sporting a walking boot. Sounds like he's going to be out this week. In all likelihood, barring a miracle. You're going to see Kyle Allen at the helm for Carolina this week. And the Giants are finally making a change. Eli Manning is out. Daniel Jones is in. I suppose that's not really an injury, but it's another kind of spot to talk about from an injury perspective. You look at both Allen and Daniel Jones, certainly very cheap on DFS sites this week. The matchups, Allen gets to go up against a fast-paced Arizona team. Those teams actually rank 1 and 2 in the league in tempo, Carolina and Arizona so far this year. And Daniel Jones gets to debut against the Bucs. So in terms of these two replacement quarterbacks, where do we slot them amongst our interest in value guys? Elliot, I'll toss this one over to you first.
You know what? I think we can throw Eli in for an injury with bruised ego after this one.
Fair.
I think Kyle Allen's really interesting because Cam Newton last week couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, right? I mean, Curtis Samuel had 240 air yards? He had multiple times he was open down the field, multiple times he was open with a ton of room to run, and Cam Newton just couldn't hit him. I think the really exciting thing about Kyle Allen is, one, the matchup with the Cardinals in terms of pace of play. Two, the fact that the Cardinals have no defenders in the secondary at this point. Three, all of his top playmakers, whether it's Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, or Curtis Samuel, are big-time run after the catch guys. And at 4K on DraftKings, I think he's incredibly interesting to have a game stack, maybe a Kyle Allen, Curtis Samuel, bring it back with Larry Fitz and Christian Kirk, and then play studs around them. I think that's a really interesting way to attack it. With Daniel Jones, I think he improves the offense overall. The Bucs have done a really good job against the run this year, but I think that secondary has some holes in it. Sterling Shepard will be back. We get Evan Ingram. I think Daniel Jones was probably the best quarterback all preseason, has some rushing upside. I think he helps the offense overall. I'd be more interested in him on FanDuel than DraftKings. I'll probably wait a week on Jones and probably just play Evan Ingram, but I think Kyle Allen's really intriguing in DFS this week.
All right, Matt, what are your thoughts on those two quarterback situations?
I'm kind of on the other side. I agree with Elliot said, but I do like Jones just a bit more because of his rushing upside. That's a guy that had 1,300 rushing yards in his 3 years at Duke, and he didn't even play a full season his senior year. So that's, kind of like Josh Allen for the Buffalo Bills. That's something we're definitely looking for in our quarterbacks. As for Kyle Allen, I couldn't agree more with what Elliot said at that price. He's actually a really sneaky play. The Cardinals last week, they just got diced up by Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews, everyone in that offense. And if the Panthers play with the pace of play that they have been so far this year, he should see a lot of volume.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see if they'll play slower. I mean, if that game is as up-tempo as it should be, the total in that game is only like 44 points. I think that's too low for what it's worth. Yeah. I wrote that game in our RotoGrinders grind down this week, and that was my favorite bet of the week, is the over in that game for what that's worth. So that takes care of the quarterback injuries. Obviously, lots of them, and lots of impactful ones that we need to keep an eye on. There's lots of other situations as well. The Kansas City running backs, Damian Williams seems extremely unlikely to play. LaShawn McCoy maybe has a better shot to suit up. So those two guys we need to monitor. Marlon Mack seems like he's going to be able to go, but he's questionable for Indianapolis officially. We've got the Philadelphia receivers, Alshon Jeffrey. Every Philadelphia wide receiver seemingly got hurt on Sunday night, so Alshon Jeffrey's a question mark this week. Deshaun Jackson's a question mark this week, and seemingly he's not going to play. Tyrell Williams is banged up for Oakland. Josh Jacobs' report came out today that he'd lost 10 pounds. Remarkable number of injuries between week 2 and week 3 here. So of these running backs, receivers, I'll let you guys have the floor. Matt, what are some of the ones that you think are most impactful to us this week?
I think the Philly injuries are the most impactful. And one that's kind of flying under the radar is Dallas Goedert. And I think his injury is so impactful because of the rate Philly uses 12 personnel. So it'll be interesting to see if this is a shift they make to more 3 wide receiver sets this week. Last week we saw Zach Ertz play 100% of the snaps. Before this game, Philly had been running 12 personnel at basically the highest rate in the NFL. So that affects everything from Nelson Aguilar to Ertz, and then obviously to the players everyone wants to play, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and Mac Hollins. So I'm just interested to see how Philadelphia handles the Goddard injury.
Yeah, just a lack of bodies there. You've got Aguilar, you've got Ertz that are healthy, and then Arcega-Whiteside should be looking at more playing time this week. For sure. Eliot, how are you handling kind of those other spots to monitor?
Yeah, week 2 was brutal for teams, right? Even Jason Peters got hurt for the Eagles as well. And Zach Ertz saw 16 targets last week. Nelson Aguilar saw 11. Aguilar, because it was the Sunday night game too, no one got priced up. So there's a lot of really good cash plays in that Eagles game. If Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy misses, Darwin Thompson becomes, your cash game lock of the week. If Marlon Mack misses and it becomes the Jordan Wilkins show against the Falcons team that funnels passes to the running back, he becomes in play. Even Naheem Hines becomes in play. This is a big news week because there's a lot of guys that are currently questionable, and it could open up a ton of value. There's a few studs that everyone wants to play, right? Whether it's Zeke is 23-point home favorites or whatever insane total the Dolphins are underdogs by this week, or Dalvin Cook or Christian McCaffrey. People are going to be searching for value, and a lot could really open up this week. And running back for me is the position where I'm willing to eat chalk the most, especially at a guy near min price if he's projected to touch the ball 15 to 20 times.
All right. Yeah, that's, these are some spots where, especially as it gets harder and harder to find value, we're going to need to monitor these injuries, especially the ones that break later or get confirmed later. For example, the situation in Kansas City with their running backs. And of course, they're still without Tyreek Hill as well. Tevin Coleman's still out for San Francisco. Let's see. Michael Gallup's going to be out a couple weeks for Dallas. Not that they need him this week as 21-point favorites anyway. Darius Geis expected to miss 6 to 8 weeks, torn meniscus. So that's one. I don't think that game, they're Monday night this week. But that's one we need to monitor, see how long he's going to be out. And we saw a timeshare split between Adrian Peterson and Chris Thompson last week. That'll likely continue based on game flow. Devin Singletary got hurt last week too. So Frank Gore, 20 carries once again. Seems like it's going to be in play. There's just lots of injuries. David Njoku got hurt on Monday night, broken wrist. He's going to be out a while. If you go to an injury report page for skilled players, it's almost 3 times as long as it was last week. Eliot, is there any more that we haven't mentioned that you think specifically relate to how you're going to handle your DFS lineup building this week?
I think we touched on the biggest one. I think Michael Gallup's interesting to see. Is Devin Smith in play, against that team? Is he going to take up some of those air yards, or do we want to move him over to Amari Cooper? The Devin Singletary thing's interesting. RotoGrinders put up something on Instagram that said, all the quarterbacks like Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger are close to retiring, but 15 years from now, we're going to be relying on Patrick Mahomes and Baker Mayfield and Tom Brady. And I feel like we're going to still be relying on Frank Gore. I swear to God, if I was a running back that was on Frank Gore's team, I'd be like, no, trade me. This is a curse. He's going to be the 3rd string running back, and I'm going to get hurt, and he's going to play, 66% of the snaps. And it is interesting that Josh Allen was a big-time red zone threat last year, and he still is this year, don't get me wrong. But Gore has seen 75% of the red zone carries for the Bills, so I guess he's in play. My thing is, in general, the stud backs this week are really where I want to go, but there could be a lot of value, with the Colts and the Chiefs running backs. Those are certainly situations I don't want to ignore.
All right, Matt, anything else you want to touch on the injury front?
Yeah, I'll touch on the Damian Williams situation. If we do get news that McCoy and Damian Williams are both out, I don't really think I want to roster Darwin Thompson still. Darrell Williams is a little bit worrisome to me. He has been playing a little bit of snaps this year, and Darrell Williams is actually a player that was splitting time with Damian Williams right when Kareem Hunt was suspended last year. So that's just at least a little worrisome for me. And then just adding to the Frank Gore, I mean, they're 6-point favorites. Buffalo is, and then they've been doing really well in the red zone. Like Elliot has said, I believe they've converted all of their red zone attempts so far this year. So highly efficient even in Frank Gore's old age.
How does the Bills start with the schedule? How'd they get the Jets, the Giants, and the Bengals like that? In terms of great matchups,
the NFL having a little bit of pity on the Buffalo Bills for their their early playoff exit a couple years ago after the kind of miraculously making it there, and it's just giving them some confidence with a good start. So that's my theory on that, anyways.
Easy matchup this week.
Yeah, I mean it is a perfect opportunity for Buffalo to go to 3-0. All right, let's move on to our second topic then, which is cash game chalk plays. We'll talk about the cornerstones, the obvious plays this week before we get into some GPP pivots. And this is a week where you're going to see a lot of people probably pay up at running back for one of the top end guys, whether it's Ezekiel Elliott or McCaffrey, or maybe going down to Dalvin Cook. Austin Eckler's been pretty good through a couple of weeks, and those guys are going to soak up some ownership with limited value at the position, at least limited reliable value at the position this week. And you're going to see people saving at wide receiver as kind of your popular build. I'll let you guys break it down a little bit here. Elliot, which of these chalky high-end running backs are you most likely to roster this week?
Do I have to pick one? Is that how this game works?
You can pick two if you want. Or
in cash, it's going to be Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook for me. I mean, Cook is performing at an amazing rate, and we've seen that throughout his career when he's healthy. He's got the breakaway ability. The Vikings only want to run. I think if it was up to Mike Zimmer, they'd never throw the ball again. And Christian McCaffrey, that Arizona Cardinals defense is one that we've looked to target running backs against for a while. As high owned as he's projected to be, I still think it's lower than it would have been if he's not coming off a bust of a week on Thursday Night Football. And I really want exposure to that game. Like you mentioned, the pace. I think he's going to be worked heavily in the passing game, in the running game. He's going to play 100% of the snaps. The thing with Zeke that worries me is, does he get all of it in the first half? Because there's a really good chance as 23-point home favorites. We saw it in the first week with Tony Pollard, who touched the ball 13 times. They don't have Zeke in much in the second half because it doesn't really gain them anything. So the question is, does he get his by that? I mean, obviously, there's no guarantee the Cowboys cover this game. The Dolphins could keep it a little bit closer and Zeke could go off. But if I had to pick two of the three, it would be Cook and McCaffrey for me.
We hope for a miracle, a couple touchdowns by the Dolphins to at least keep it remotely competitive, maybe for 3 quarters. But yeah, Dallas minus 21.5, minus 22, depending on where you look. And the Patriots are minus 22.5 against the Jets, which is 2 21-point spreads in the same week, which I am fairly confident I have never seen. And, the last time it happened, it just doesn't happen very often. I was reading some stuff on this yesterday, and the largest spreads in NFL history, a couple 28, 27s. I believe the 2 largest ones were not covered for what that's worth. But
Broncos Jags a couple years ago, everyone was all over the Broncos, right? And I think the Jags lost by like 7 points or something like that.
Yeah, and last year there was the infamous game where Minnesota was favored by 17 against Buffalo in the early season, and Buffalo beat them 27-6. So I'm not saying that that's going to happen here. I certainly don't expect Miami to go into Dallas and win. I don't expect the Jets with their third-string quarterback to go into New England and win. But crazier things have happened in this league. So, I already went to you. Matt, what are you looking at with the high-end running backs this week?
I couldn't agree more with what Elliot said. On Zeke, I think the main worry is just that he gets pulled. If he plays a half, it's just not going to be viable in DFS this week. Looking at Saquon Barkley at 9,100, obviously he's in play every single week. 25 touches last week. He has target counts of 6 and 7. You have to think Daniel Jones is an upgrade on this offense, but I think the only worry here is whether Daniel Jones will target Saquon as much as Eli did. Either way, I think he's a focal point of this offense. They have a pretty good offensive line. So I think that's just a small worry. also should be noted, Christian McCaffrey, he was limited by Tampa Bay last week for what that's worth. I'm not really considering that, but just thought I'd throw it out there. And then Austin Eckler, he's kind of a direct pivot off Dalvin Cook. I do prefer Cook 1-to-1, but Eckler's been seeing a lot of work this year too, 19 and 23 touches. He has target counts of 6 and 7. This particular game, it is an over-under of 48.5. That's the second highest on the slate. And then as far as matchup goes, the Texans have been quietly allowing 6 yards per carry to backs. That's the worst in the NFL. Allow some damage to backs out of the receiving game. Fournette had 4 for 40. Kamara had 7 for 72. So Eckler can really work in all phases of the game here.
Yeah, Eckler's been very, very solid through the first couple weeks. 12 catches, 75% snap share. I mean, he's been a guy that's probably
right.
What's
He's
that?
Melvin Gordon. He plays the same exact role Melvin Gordon does. He just doesn't get priced the way Melvin Gordon.
Yeah, not looking good for Melvin Gordon on the leverage front when Eckler can come in and put up the same type of production. So those are kind of the chalk plays at running back this week. You're going to want to fit in at least one of those higher end guys, maybe even two if you can save at the other positions. And I think the big question at receiver is what to do with a mega cheap Nelson Aguilar. Do you have to plow him into your cash game lineups? He's 4,800 on FanDuel. He's 3,600 on DraftKings. He's 7,800 on Fantasy Draft, $14 on Yahoo. We basically got him projected at 30% ownership everywhere. Because, the Eagles are missing 2, possibly 3 other targets with Goddard and Jeffrey and Jackson all banged up. So it's a simple question. Do you have to play Nelson Aguilar if you're making one, cash game lineup this week? Matt, I'll start this one off with you.
I don't think you have to play him. He is a very strong play, but you do have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside in the same offense at 3,500. The targets were very skewed last week. Arcega-Whiteside did only have 4. Aguilar had 11. But Arcega-Whiteside did run just 1 fewer route than Aguilar. And then, not knowing whether Philadelphia is going to employ more 12 personnel this week, I'm kind of off Matt Collins. I think it'll be Arcega-Whiteside and Aguilar that are soaking up the snaps here.
Arcega-Whiteside, I'm a big college football DFS guy, and he was dominant at Stanford, a huge red zone target. And, my opinion on him is probably a little bit skewed from how good he was with the collegiate game. So I'm a fan of him. But everybody will certainly be flocking to Aguilar after last week's performance in cash games. Elliot, what's your thoughts on Aguilar and how important he is this week?
I mean, first, just to echo, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was something else at Stanford. That guy played like Mike Evans in college. I mean, he's a touchdown machine. It is interesting that, he was phenomenal this preseason, but he has very little, in-game experience with Carson Wentz. And if we look back at last year, Nelson Aguilar led the team in target share at 21.7% when Alshon Jeffrey was off the field. At 3,600, I think you kind of have to play him in cash. I think you can absolutely fade him in GPPs. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside's probably a good direct pivot off of him in GPPs. But in cash, I'm guessing he's probably closer to 60 or 65% owned in cash. And I really think he can only hurt you. You know what I mean? Like by fading him, even if he scores 8 points, you're not jumping up that much against the field, and he's going to allow people to play all those studs. So I really think from a roster construction standpoint, cash, and just a pure value, that he makes a ton of sense as a guy that's probably locked into 7 or 8 targets this week.
Just for clarity for all of you out there, we had to get Elliot on the show here tonight to get him doing something other than looking up Derrick Henry's high school stats, which he was fascinated about on social media this morning. We're taping this up Thursday night. So I will admit, though, they're pretty good high school numbers for the guy.
But honestly, I had to write up a showdown slate tonight, and to try to make this game interesting, I had to come up with a couple of things. So Gardner Minshew's naked workouts and Derrick Henry's high school stats is what I was able to come up with.
It was pretty entertaining watching that on Twitter this morning. So, and the gif of the lawnmower running everybody over was pretty good. Let's talk about some of these other guys. So from there, I mean, the build gets a little less obvious. Let's talk quarterbacks for just a second in cash games. You've got the expensive guys. You've got Mahomes. You've got Lamar Jackson in a head-to-head showdown this week. You've got cheaper guys like Jameis Winston and Kyler Murray, and the new starters like Daniel Jones, Kyle Allen. So in cash games this week, is it a pay up for the safety of a Lamar or a Mahomes at quarterback, or do you take a shot on one of the cheaper guys? Elliot, I'll go to you on that one.
I'm never a guy that likes to pay up for quarterback. I mean, Lamar is the Konami code, right? I mean, he's the kind of guy that I've been attacking all season long and all last year, but his price is now matching that. Now, obviously, it's the highest total of the week, and I get why people would want to go there, but for me, there's kind of two guys that I'm really interested in at this point of the week. One is Josh Allen at 5,900. Now, we're still looking at a guy that has, 5 of his last 8 weeks finished a top 5 quarterback and never less than quarterback 13. With the rushing upside, he's going to get 9 or 10 carries. The Bengals do not cover the deep ball well at all this year. I think they have 10 passes against them for 15 or more yards this season, and teams are averaging 21.3 yards per attempt. So the Bengals, they don't have good linebackers. They have slow linebackers. I think it's an opportunity for Josh Allen to continue to crush value. I think he's about $600 or $700 underpriced this week. Kyle Allen is $4K against the Arizona Cardinals defense, right? I mean, they're not quite the Miami Dolphins, but that defense is pretty atrocious. And he does have a little running upside as well. I think he ran a 4.76 in the combine. He's got some athleticism I talked about earlier. He's got the playmakers, very pace up game. I think that at 4K in cash, he really doesn't need to do much to get you there. And if he throws for a couple touchdowns and maybe gets 20 yards rushing, he's going to set up your cash lineup to fit in all the other studs that you want. So I think Kyle Allen's absolutely in play for cash this week.
And he started in week 17 last year, actually got a victory and 225 yards, a couple scores, I believe, in that game from looking that up the other night. So, that's
and a rushing touchdown in that game as well, I think.
He did. So, in the pace that game will likely be played at, I certainly think that it's not out of the question. Of course, this is all assuming that Cam Newton officially gets ruled out, which we expect, but has not been confirmed as of the time that we are taping this video. Matt, what are you doing at quarterback this week?
My favorite play is pivoting over to the other side of that game and targeting Kyler Murray at 5,800. I think he's just a little bit cheaper than Josh Allen here, but he brings just as much, if not more, upside. You two already touched on the pace. Arizona running with the second fastest seconds per snap. That's only behind Carolina. They're using 4 wide receivers in that air raid scheme. Murray's averaging 47, which is wild, passing attempts per game, and he hasn't even begun to run yet. He has 17 rushing yards on the year. This is a guy that ran for 1,000 yards in college. So hopefully we can get him a little bit more comfortable on the ground this week. And, this is a team that started running no huddle at 72% last week. Their pace should be high either way. The attempt should be there. Hopefully we just get him on the ground.
Can I throw in one point about Kyler Murray is that the only reason I didn't mention him was because over on FanDuel, we think he's mispriced on DraftKings. I don't know who drank or smoked what before they priced Kyler Murray over on FanDuel, but it's $7,200. I think he's a cash game lock on FanDuel, and all your points are phenomenal. And, also the Lions contain quarterbacks as well as any team in the league, and he played them week 1, and the Ravens are really good at containing quarterbacks as well. So the Panthers are about middle of the road, and all he needs is 1 or 2. He's still got 7 carries on the season. That's not terrible rushing usage. So I think the Kyler Murray call is phenomenal.
Yeah, Murray's certainly a strong play here, and obviously last week he looked comfortable against Baltimore. I mean, he didn't necessarily lose the game, and you look at the end results in that game. I mean, the Cardinals settled for 3 field goals inside the 5-yard line. Surprised they didn't go for some of those, but ended up losing by 1 score, and it certainly wasn't Murray's fault that they lost that game, and it was a tough road matchup as a 2-touchdown underdog. It held himself up pretty well, so things should get a little easier for him, and he's back at home this week, so I like that call as well, and I think he's in play, whether it is cash games or GPPs. Anything else you guys want to touch on in terms of cash game roster construction? Actually, I said we touch on this, so let's do it. Let's touch on defense. I mean, Elliot, you mentioned you didn't have enough of the Patriots D last week. Seems like defenses against Miami are going to be a thing. People play the Patriots again against the Jets, Dallas again against Miami, with both teams being 3-touchdown favorites. Is it a priority to jam in a top-tier defense this week?
I mean, listen, I think this is going to be the theme of the season, like you said, with the Dolphins as bad as they are. And Josh Rosen's in there now. He's more of a statue than Fitzpatrick. He's been turnover prone. But ultimately, paying up for a defense at such a high variance position, where if the Dolphins don't have or the Cowboys don't have a defensive touchdown, and the Dolphins score any points, there's a lot of opportunity for paying down this week, saving $1,800 on a team like the Chargers against the Texans, who have allowed 4 more sacks for 8 straight weeks. That provides a nice little floor there as well. So I'm probably going to stick to my guns for a while and just say I don't really pay up for chalky defenses. That's not the way I go with such a high variance position. Defensive touchdowns are so random. It's really tough to rely on them. That being said, the Dolphins are a JV team. So it is, even though all logic would suggest what I'm saying is correct, it is a little scary. And Luke Falk, the nice thing about the Jets and Luke Falk is they only throw the ball 3 yards, and it's tougher to throw interceptions when you only throw it 3 yards.
Yeah, Le'Veon Bell caught 10 balls on Monday? So
I just need to say this because we talked about me going on the Jets game last week.
Yeah.
At halftime, they had 9 pass attempts and they had 4 passing yards. And I asked a couple of Jets fans as I walked up, I was like, "What is going on?" And they're like, "Man, I'm just here to drink beers, man. I don't even care about." I was like, "Listen, that's the right approach if you go see this team play." So, I'm just ripping on the Jets, but.
The beers consumed ratio is greater than the yards per attempt for the Jets. I think the logic holds, and it's really tough because of recency bias to not say, well, you just got to jam in Dallas or you just got to jam in New England. But the defensive touchdowns are so fluky, and the Dolphins, as bad as they are, they're not going to give up 2 defensive scores every week. We hope. So I do think that it's not mandatory to do that. I mean, you can go down and get if you're playing on DraftKings, Buffalo is $900 cheaper than Dallas. And they've got a similarly good home matchup against Cincinnati. So I don't think it's a requirement. Certainly if you have the salary, go ahead and do it, but I don't think it's a requirement. Matt, what are your thoughts about the defense against Miami theme?
I agree with Elliot. I think it's just it's a high variance position. In week 1, we saw, I think it was San Francisco lead the position in points, and they were down at something like 2,200 or 2,400 on DraftKings. And just as far as last week goes, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Pittsburgh had 2 defensive touchdowns called back. If those touchdowns stand, the slate looks very different at the end of the day. As far as the Chargers go this week, my 2 favorite things to target when looking at cheap defenses are whether they're going to be playing from a lead, can they kind of pin their ears back and pressure the quarterback? And then what are their pressure statistics like? Are they a team that actually generates pressure? And the Chargers fit the bill with both of those. So they're actually my favorite cheap defense this week as well.
Yeah, Houston's pass blocking has been pretty alarming through the first couple of weeks. So
Houston's pass blocking it makes Miami's pass blocking look like an NFL team. That's how bad.
Ouch. That's really bad. So, that's an interesting call right there. I don't mind that one. And that kind of segues us into, let's talk about some defensive matchups, talk about some wide receiver quarterback matchups. I don't think it's as impactful of a week, as maybe we've seen with some others. I think it's, the first thing that caught my eye was, that DeAndre Hopkins, poor guy has to go against Marshawn Lattimore and Jalen Ramsey, and now he's likely going to be shadowed by Casey Hayward this week. The guy hasn't been able to catch a good matchup in 3 weeks. So that's an interesting one. And, Matt, you just kind of touched on that game a little bit. I presume you're not as high on the Houston skill players this week.
I'm not as high on them. As far as wide receiver cornerback matchups, my favorite one to target in that price range is Keenan Allen. Somehow he's priced at wide receiver 8 on DraftKings at $7K. We saw a ridiculous target share, 42.9% last week. He had 15 targets, 216 air yards. That's with Mike Williams being banged up and Hunter Henry out. Houston already cut Aaron Colvin. They're now looking at Lonnie Johnson, who's a rookie, the 35-year-old Jonathan Joseph, and Bradley Roby primarily covering the slot where Keenan Allen runs the majority of his routes. I think he should just absolutely eat in this matchup on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, Keenan Allen just going to get so many targets. I mean, him and Eckler are just going to be monster usage guys as long as Henry's out, and we don't know if Mike Williams is at 100%. Williams is a great red zone guy, but he's not a heavy target monster, and I think, those two guys, two receivers, one receiver and Eckler out of the backfield, really strong options this week, and a Chargers team that could score some points. Elliot, what are you looking at as far as individual wide receiver matchups this week?
Yeah, I swear sometimes Matt and I share notes. We don't, but Keenan Allen was the guy I was really, really excited to talk about. So, I think he's going to eat. I think he's a cash game lock for me as well with that volume. A couple guys that are a little bit lower that I think are really interesting. One is Curtis Samuel. And last week he had 240 air yards, led the league in air yards. We're looking at a Cardinals team that gave up, everything to Marquise Brown. And in week 1, Kenny Golladay and the air yards got them. They're on their backup cornerbacks. I think that he's priced too cheap, and he didn't really go off the way he should have based on his volume. I think he's a really strong bounce back candidate and a really good matchup. And Kenny Golladay is another one for me with a lot of those Bucs receivers being chalked this week. I think he's a really strong pivot against an Eagles team that allows 115 yards to wide receiver ones this year and 108 last year. He's one of the top guys in air yards. He clearly is the number one receiver on that team, even though coming into the year I thought it'd be kind of more of a 1A, 1B. Stafford has taken the most deep shots of any quarterback in the NFL this year, and that Eagles secondary is a mess. So I think Kenny Golladay at 6,600 is really interesting. Couldn't agree with Matt more about Keenan Allen at 7,000. And I think Curtis Samuel, along with a guy like a Larry Fitzgerald, where the Panthers really struggle in the slot. And I don't know what he has to do to get a price increase, but apparently not have 100 yards and lead the team in red zone targets. But those are a couple guys that I really like this week.
Yeah, how about Larry Fitzgerald? Back-to-back 100-yard games, 24 targets in 2 weeks. He's back, man. He's got the Frank Gore youthful juices flowing, Larry Fitzgerald. Fun to see him producing still. All the rumors about retirement and all that, he's putting that to rest right now. So Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, obviously, if you're interested in playing Kyler Murray this week, those two should continue to soak up plenty of targets, and Kirk went over 100 yards last week as well. Let's see. Any other specific cornerback matchups, you guys? I don't think it's as impactful of a week for individual one-on-one matchups.
I think one other guy I just want to mention, because Jimmy Smith is going to be out, is that Sammy Watkins isn't going to have that hard of a matchup this week. And we're talking about the guy that he did see 13 targets last week. DeMarcus Robinson and McCall Hardman, I think each saw 6, so he doubled their target workload. On FanDuel, he's 400, 500 more expensive than DeMarcus Robinson. I think Sammy Watkins got a price down week where last week he got the volume, he just didn't blow up, and I think this is a good week to try to go back to him, where I'm not as worried about the Ravens secondary due to their injuries.
All right, Matt, you got anything else on that front? Otherwise, we'll move to some GPP plays.
I'll touch on the Tampa Bay pass catchers quickly. So cross your fingers when you're going for these Tampa Bay pass catchers, but Jameis Winston actually did look a little better last week. He completed around 64% of his passes. If Mike Evans is going to get right this year, it is going to be against this Giants team. DeAndre Baker has been absolutely atrocious in coverage. He's allowed 11 catches on 13 targets for 272 yards, and he'll be on the outside. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin both play a bit on the outside, with Tampa Bay running a lot of 12 personnel, so 2 tight ends. So we'll get Godwin out there as well. And then if Janoris Jenkins does end up shadowing something he's done in the past, Mike Evans has a full 7 inches of height advantage on Janoris Jenkins. If there's a get-right week, I think it's this week against the Giants.
That's a perfect segue into the GPP plays, the lower-owned pivots this week, because I really wanted to touch on this. There was a national TV Thursday night game last week. Everyone's talking about Chris Godwin. He's ascended to the number 1 role in Tampa Bay. Mike Evans is done. It's all Chris Godwin now. And suddenly, Chris Godwin's more expensive than Mike Evans on DraftKings this week. And maybe Chris Godwin does end up being the number 1 in Tampa for the year as a whole. But Mike Evans isn't just going to disappear. This is a guy that he's going to have his weeks. Like you mentioned, Matt, he's got the advantage against this secondary. And if Evans is going to have single digit, like 5-6% of ownership this week, I'm really interested in him as a tournament play. So I like that call. Elliot, who are some of your favorite tournament pivots this week?
Yeah, just to echo on Mike Evans, I think he's got an 18-8 out this year, and the Giants have just gotten absolutely wrecked down the field. So if that continues, I think Evans is in for a huge week, and it's just the definition of a GPP play when a guy busts on national TV and you come back to him. So speaking of a guy not looking great who just played on national TV, Devonta Freeman. I think he's in for a really interesting matchup. You know, his snaps went from 50 to 62%. He's averaging, 2.2 yards a carry. He has not looked good on the ground. But Darius Leonard might be out in this game. The Colts funnel targets underneath. Last year I think they gave up 8.75 targets to running backs per game. Freeman's seen 75% of the team's targets at the running back position through 2 weeks. He's down to 4,900. He has touchdown equity in this offense. The Colts really limit big plays against, which is how they just got the Eagles with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. I think Freeman is as cheap as he's going to be in this role. And, it's still the third highest total game, and no one seems to want to play Freeman. So I think Freeman is an incredibly interesting third running back this week.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how he's utilized going forward, how the snaps shake out there. Obviously, he's probably going to have some frustrating weeks, but we know he does have some upside and in a favorable matchup in what could be a fairly close, high-scoring game this week. I think he's an interesting target. This guy isn't necessarily going to be low-owned, but I want to make sure we touch on him here. How does Saquon Barkley's outlook change with Daniel Jones at quarterback? I want to let you guys take an opportunity to answer that question. Matt, I'll start with you on that one.
I don't think it changes a lot. He's someone the Giants obviously want to involve as the focal point of their offense. He's a guy that had 25 touches last week. I think the main concern is targets out of the backfield, whether Daniel Jones will try to incorporate him as much as Eli Manning did. Otherwise, I think Saquon Barkley is a strong play basically every single week based on volume alone. They have a great offensive line, and hopefully Daniel Jones can kind of get the wheels spinning on the offense again. Hopefully they score some more touchdowns and make some red zone trips.
Elliot, your thoughts on Barkley with the new quarterback?
Yeah, I think Jones is a better player than Eli Manning at this point. I think anything is an upgrade to the offense. So if they can move the ball a little bit more and hold on to the ball a little bit more, I think it helps Barkley, who, through 2 weeks has been incredibly efficient. It's not like he hasn't been good. He just hasn't been great. So I think it's a bump up to the entire Giants offense.
Yeah, it certainly can't be much worse as a whole. So I'll give you guys an open floor now. Matt, some of your thoughts on GPP pivots, guys we haven't touched on during the show that you want to make sure we mention.
At running back, I think one interesting play is Aaron Jones, and we'll see how ownership shakes out throughout the week. We obviously have a lot of question marks down at the bottom, like the Chiefs situation and Devin Singletary that'll probably influence ownership a lot. But Aaron Jones sitting at 6,100, he had 30 touches last week, and LaFleur seems like he's up to his old ways. He said he wants to somehow get Jones more involved, and that wasn't just on the ground either. Jones had 7 targets, which was very surprising to me. In a game where the Packers are favored to win by 7.5 points, I think we see another heavy dose of Aaron Jones here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they, there was I think part of what's keeping his projection down is there was a blurb that came out the other day that they want to see Williams more involved, or they want to be more of a 50-50 split. But, some of that coach speak, you got to let it roll off to the side because it's production on the field that matters. And the fact is Aaron Jones had 23 carries for 116 yards, and he also had 6 targets last week. So I'm not going to be fooled by the coach speak. And if that puts Aaron Jones down at 3 to 4% ownership, I'll gladly take some of that in GPPs.
Some days you're going to have to explain Jamal Williams to me.
It's like Mike McCarthy's still there. He's got the dirt, the Williams dirt is somewhere that, it's threatening. So he needs the reps to avoid airing the dirty laundry. That's the only explanation.
Every metric says he's no good, but every coach is like, let's get him 40 to 50% snap share. It makes no sense.
Yes, I agree. Anybody else, Elliot, on the GPP pivot side that you want to talk about?
So I don't know if these are necessarily pivots. One might be a leverage play in the Cardinals game, but I'm going to go a couple really cheap guys that I expect to have nearly no ownership. Damiere Byrd of the Cardinals has played 90% of the snaps back-to-back weeks and has 14 targets. I think he's interesting exposure at 3K. If he scores a touchdown, he's got 20-point upside. If you're looking to stack that game, I think he's definitely a guy you want, to mix in some exposure with, and I think he's going to carry no ownership. I think that one's a very sharp play. This one, I'm interested to kind of actually hear your guys' reaction, and no reaction will tell me what I need to hear as well. Ty Johnson of the Lions. The Lions just cut C.J. Anderson, who played 20% of snaps. Ty Johnson's snaps went from 9% to 20%. They were high on him all offseason. He's an explosive player. They want to use him in the pass-catching role, so to speak, even though he didn't really do it at Maryland. And I've saw a lot of beat reporters talk about that the C.J. Anderson getting cut actually says a lot more about Ty Johnson than Kerryon Johnson. So at 3K, if he plays, they've really tried to keep Kerryon Johnson's snaps under 60% so far. If he plays 40% of the snaps, I think he's got a shot to do something. So, it's not a single entry kind of guy. It's probably a 150 max where you have maybe 3 or 4% to triple the field. But I think Ty Johnson at 40% snap share is interesting at minimum price.
Yeah, that's a really intriguing call. It could be the Demarcus Robinson of this week, if you will. Like the guy's hair. That's certainly I could never pull that off, but will be interesting to monitor that snap count and against the defense and basically a team that's been ravaged already by injuries in the Eagles. Detroit's got a pretty low team total, but if he's going to play more of the passing down reps, if they're behind, that doesn't necessarily hurt him. So at 3K, doesn't need to do much to pay that off. If he gets in the end zone, or catches 5 balls, something like that, certainly pays off that price tag pretty easily. And if you're fading some of the other chalkier value, I think that's really intriguing. So, Matt, anything else to add before we move to our final topic?
I'll just echo Elliot on Damiere Byrd. I think he's a fantastic play. He kind of provides this direct pivot off Nelson Aguilar and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who will probably be a little higher owned in tournaments. But Damiere Byrd at 3K, Elliot touched on the snap share and the targets, but I don't think people should be worried about Crabtree at all. It seems like he's playing for Keyshawn Johnson more than anyone else. Damiere Byrd only has 106 air yards this year, and I think that will keep some people off him. But he's quietly a super fast, big play receiver. He had 4.32 speed coming out of college. So this is definitely a guy that can break a big play. He has that in his toolbox. A 20-point game is not out of the realm of possibility for Damiere Byrd.
And for all you narrative street people, right, this is against his former team that he used to have big plays for. So if you're a narrative street revenge of the bird,
revenge of the bird,
he's playing his former team.
The bird is the word. All right, let's move to our final topic. Let's talk some game stacks, some interesting spots to target. Mine is not going to be a surprise. I've talked about it a couple times on the show. I think the total in that Arizona game is far too low at about 44, 45 points. With the pace that those two teams play at, the fact that you can get guys like Kyler Murray and Kirk and Fitzgerald and possibly Kyle Allen, and you can get those guys at cheap price tags. Obviously McCaffrey or David Johnson you're paying for, but the passing games for these two teams are very affordable in DFS. I like stacking up a few pieces on each side of this game and hoping we get a nice back and forth shootout. So that's my favorite game as far as one with a lower total or lowish total to target this week. Elliot, what are you looking at for juicy games this week?
Yeah, I mean, first just to echo, I think we've all talked about it, right? Matt's talked about Kyler Murray, I've talked about Kyle Allen. I don't think I ever shut up about Curtis Samuel. There's a lot of guys in this game that I'm really intrigued by, and I think my favorite part is everyone's affordable to stack. If I have to go down the list, I'm gonna stop me if you've heard this before, but I'm going to talk about the Bills game again. Josh Allen and John Brown. I don't know what they need to do to get a price increase, but Josh Allen wants to throw deep, and John Brown has 40% of the air yards and is averaging.
Yeah, he's been great.
And the Bengals, again, like I talked about earlier, on passes 15 or more yards down the field, they give 21.3 yards per attempt. That's absurd. Josh Allen kills bad defenses that don't get after the passer and can't cover deep, and that's exactly what the Bengals are. And if I'm looking to bring it back, I think Tyler Boyd's really intriguing. I know John Ross had that big play at the end of the game that made his numbers, I think, look a little bit better than he actually played. Don't get me wrong, John Ross has had an excellent start to the year. There's no way to counter-argue that. But Tyler Boyd's going to avoid Trey White. He's going to go in the slot. He had a big touchdown call back last week. We're looking at about 8 to 10 targets in this game. And as a little mini game stack, I like a Josh Allen, John Brown, run it back with Tyler Boyd.
You talk about John Brown, and we always have talked about his big playability, and everybody knows that. But this guy's put up solid production this year, and he doesn't have a catch longer than 40 yards. He's got 18 targets in 2 games. Like, this is a safe John Brown plus the upside that we haven't seen yet. So this matchup against the Bengals could be one for that upside to show up in 5,500 on DraftKings. Super cheap for John Brown. So I love that call there. Matt, what are you looking at as far as some other games to target if you're looking to stack some things up this week?
I like the New York Giants Tampa Bay Buccaneers game it's right around 47.5 at the over-under right now. But like we talked about before, this is a really sweet spot for Tampa Bay pass catchers. And I think that has to put Jameis Winston in play, who did perform a little bit better last week. Again, 64% completion was pretty good here. And these New York corners are just absolutely atrocious. They're a team you want to target all day. Running it back, say you play Jameis and Mike Evans, or Jameis, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin even, which I think is in play. You can take Saquon or Evan Engram, Sterling Shepard. All of these guys have very low ADOT. Sterling Shepard finally back off the injury. Maybe he draws some lower ownership here.
All right. Yeah, those are certainly some games to target. I like the prospects of that game. And then, of course, the game of the week, obviously, everyone's going to be watching Baltimore and Kansas City. Lamar Jackson against Patrick Mahomes. That one should be a lot of fun. A couple 2-0 teams. And, it's been really impressive to see Lamar Jackson, the way he's grown as a passer this year. And he's not sneaking up on anybody from a DFS perspective. But I'm really looking forward to watching that battle this week with those 2 young gun quarterbacks. And see if they can have a little shootout there in Kansas City. So that one should be a lot of fun.
One fun question to wrap it up on that game. If you had to pick one, are you going with Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes?
It's a great question. I don't want to spoil anybody's answer. So, Matt, what do you think?
I'll take Lamar Jackson with his rushing upside.
Yeah, he didn't have to do it in week 1 because they blitzed Miami, but last week in a relatively competitive game, 120 rushing yards, 16 attempts, and the fact that, he threw for 275 and a couple scores. Look, you're not going wrong with either one of these guys, and with Jimmy Smith out for the Ravens, Mahomes can certainly sling it around, but I'll take Lamar by a hair, but not saying I'm trying to slight Mahomes at all.
I think the answer is yes, right?
The answer is yes. That's correct.
I agree with you guys. Lamar Jackson for the savings, and the rushing upside is just such a cheat code.
Yeah. 40 yards is a touchdown.
Yeah. If he gets 100 yards and a touchdown rushing, which is well within his range of outcomes, and we're talking about 19 points rushing, and then you add in all the passing, it's going to be tough for Mahomes to match that. So I think Lamar Jackson's the higher ceiling player, and that's coming from I don't even know how I say that when you watch Patrick Mahomes play football, but I do agree with both of you that Lamar Jackson is the way I would go.
All right. That's an action-packed hour, and that's going to wrap us up for this week. So those of you who are watching with the free stream this week, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope that you'll consider a premium subscription so you can come back and watch us each and every week. And, of course, you can check out Eliot does a ton of content with the Quant Edge. You can check them out at thequantedge.com, and plenty of good tools over there, and really excited to be partnering up with Eliot and company this year with RotoGrinders. So check them out, thequantedge.com, and check out all our great RotoGrinders premium content as well. So for Matt and Eliot, that's going to wrap us up for this week. We thank you so much for watching, and thanks to our producer Simon as well. I'm Justin Van Zuiden. Have a great week 3, everybody. We'll see you later.